The heavy glass doors of Seattle's most prestigious law firm burst open with such force that they slam against marble walls, reverberating through the mahogany-paneled conference room where 12 corporate lawyers sit frozen in shock. The woman they've been systematically humiliating for the past 3 hours, calling her delusional, unstable, a fraud, stands perfectly still as thunderous footsteps echo through the hallway like an approaching storm. Senior partner Victoria Blackwood stops mid-sentence, her condescending smirk vanishing as the sound grows louder. "What the hell is?" she begins, but her words die in her throat as 6 figures in full tactical gear appear in the doorway, their presence transforming the sterile corporate environment into something that feels suddenly, terrifyingly real. From which corner of the world are you witnessing this incredible reversal of power? If moments where arrogance meets reality inspire you, smash that subscribe button for more stories where truth arrives with overwhelming force. The 42nd floor of the Blackwood, Sterling and Associates building commanded a breathtaking view of Seattle's skyline. But no one in the main conference room was admiring the scenery on this rain-soaked Thursday afternoon in November. The room itself was a monument to corporate power, floor-to-ceiling windows, a polished mahogany table that could seat 20, and walls lined with photographs of the firm's most prominent victories in cases that had shaped American corporate law. Today, however, this symbol of legal authority was serving as the stage for what appeared to be the systematic destruction of one woman's credibility and character. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Phoenix Chen sat at the far end of the massive conference table, her posture maintaining the military bearing that had been drilled into her through years of the most demanding training in the world. She wore a simple black business suit that she had purchased specifically for this deposition, knowing that her usual casual civilian clothes would be used against her by lawyers trained to find weakness in every detail. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a regulation-style bun, and around her wrist was a black paracord bracelet that she unconsciously adjusted when the questioning became particularly hostile. Despite facing 12 of Seattle's most aggressive corporate attorneys, her dark eyes remained steady and alert, constantly scanning the room with the awareness of someone trained to identify threats from any direction. Victoria Blackwood dominated the proceedings from her position at the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her charcoal Armani suit projecting the kind of authority that had made her one of the most feared litigators on the West Coast. At 58, Blackwood had built her reputation by destroying opposing witnesses through a combination of legal expertise and psychological manipulation that reduced even experienced professionals to confused, contradictory testimony. Her approach to this deposition was following a familiar pattern: undermine the witness's credibility, expose inconsistencies in their story, and create a record that would make any jury question everything the witness claimed to be true. The deposition had been ongoing for 3 hours, and Blackwood's strategy was becoming increasingly clear. She was portraying Sarah as an unstable former employee whose claims about her military background were elaborate fabrications designed to support a wrongful termination lawsuit against her former employer, Titan Defense Solutions. The case centered around allegations that Titan had discriminated against Sarah based on gender and had terminated her when she reported safety violations in training programs used by military contractors. "Ms. Chen," Blackwood continued, her tone dripping with condescension as she reviewed documents spread across the table. "You claim that you served as a Navy SEAL, correct?" Sarah's response was measured and professional. "I am a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group." "Yes, ma'am." Blackwood's expression suggested she had just heard someone claim to be Superman. "Ms. Chen, I think we both know that women are not Navy SEALs. The SEAL program has never admitted female candidates, and your claims to have completed such training are, frankly, preposterous." Several of the younger associates at the table exchanged glances that mixed amusement with amazement at their senior partner's aggressive dismantling of the witness. Sarah's attorney, David Martinez, a solo practitioner who specialized in employment discrimination cases, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had warned Sarah that Blackwood would challenge every aspect of her background, but the systematic mockery of her military service was more intense than he had anticipated. "Ma'am," Sarah replied calmly, The information about female integration into naval special warfare programs is classified. I understand your skepticism, but my service record speaks for itself. Blackwood's laugh was sharp and theatrical. Your service record? Ms. Chen, we've reviewed your employment history extensively. You worked as a security consultant for 18 months before my client terminated your employment for cause. There's no documentation of any Navy SEAL training, no evidence of special operations service, and certainly no indication that you possess the qualifications you claim. She gestured toward a stack of personnel files. What we do have evidence of is a pattern of grandiose claims about your background, difficulty working with colleagues, and a tendency to create conflicts with supervisors who question your alleged expertise. Sarah's composure never wavered despite the increasingly hostile tone. Ma'am, my military service record is maintained by the Department of Defense. The classification level of my assignments prevents disclosure of specific operational details in civilian proceedings. How convenient, Blackwood sneered. Ms. Chen, isn't it true that you've created this elaborate fantasy about military service because you couldn't accept that your employment was terminated due to poor performance rather than discrimination? David Martinez finally objected to the argumentative questioning, but Blackwood had already achieved her goal. The room was filled with the kind of tension that comes from watching someone's credibility being systematically destroyed by a professional who had perfected the art of character assassination. Let me ask you this, Ms. Chen, Blackwood continued, leaning forward with predatory intensity. If you're truly a Navy SEAL, as you claim, where are your medals? Where are your commendations? Where is any physical evidence of this alleged heroic military service? Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to touch something beneath her suit jacket, but she restrained the gesture before it became obvious. Ma'am, personnel serving in classified operations often cannot display their awards publicly due to operational security requirements. The room erupted in poorly suppressed laughter from several of the associate attorneys. Blackwood's expression suggested she had just caught Sarah in the most obvious lie imaginable. Operational security, Blackwood repeated mockingly. Ms. Chen, do you honestly expect this court to believe that you're some kind of secret military operative whose service is so classified that no evidence of it can be produced? I expect the court to consider all evidence presented to it, ma'am. Blackwood stood and walked around the table, her movement designed to intimidate and dominate the witness. Ms. Chen, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've dealt with hundreds of witnesses who've attempted to mislead courts with fabricated credentials and false testimony. Your claims about Navy SEAL service are among the most outrageous I've ever encountered. She paused directly behind Sarah's chair, a psychological tactic designed to create maximum discomfort. Women like you, Ms. Chen, sometimes create elaborate fantasies about military heroism to compensate for feelings of inadequacy in their civilian careers. It's a well-documented psychological phenomenon. Sarah turned slightly to maintain eye contact with her interrogator. Ma'am, I understand your skepticism. However, my military service is a matter of official record, regardless of whether that record is currently accessible for these proceedings. Official record, Blackwood repeated with theatrical disbelief. Ms. Chen, if such records existed, don't you think your attorney would have produced them? The fact that no documentation supports your claims proves their fabrications designed to generate sympathy for what is essentially an employment dispute. David Martinez attempted to redirect the questioning, but Blackwood was just getting started. She returned to her seat and opened another file, her movements suggesting she was about to deliver a devastating blow to Sarah's credibility. Ms. Chen, during your employment with Titan Defense Solutions, did you tell your supervisor, Mr. James Wilson, that you had completed Navy SEAL training? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Wilson asked about my qualifications for developing training protocols, and I provided accurate information about my background. And when Mr. Wilson expressed skepticism about your claims, how did you respond? Sarah considered her answer carefully. I told him that my qualifications could be verified through appropriate military channels if he felt verification was necessary. Blackwood's smile was triumphant. But no such verification was ever provided, was it? Mr. Wilson never initiated the verification process, ma'am. Because he recognized your claims as obvious fabrications, Blackwood stated rather than asked. Ms. Chen, Isn't it true that your inability to provide any evidence of SEAL training contributed to your supervisor's loss of confidence in your capabilities? Ma'am, Mr. Wilson's concerns were based on his assumption that women couldn't serve in special operations roles. When I explained that such assumptions were incorrect, he became hostile and began looking for reasons to terminate my employment. Blackwood's expression suggested she had just proven her point perfectly. So your response to legitimate questions about your qualifications was to accuse your supervisor of gender discrimination. Is that accurate? The trap was elegant and obvious, but Sarah had no choice but to answer honestly. I responded by explaining that his assumptions about women in special operations were outdated and incorrect. And you couldn't prove your claims because your alleged service is conveniently classified. Blackwood concluded with satisfaction. Ms. Chen, doesn't this sound like exactly the kind of unprovable story someone would create to avoid accountability for poor job performance? The deposition continued for another hour, with Blackwood systematically dismantling every aspect of Sarah's claims about her military service. She focused particularly on the physical demands of SEAL training, the statistical improbability of female success in such programs, and the suspicious convenience of classification levels that prevented any documentation from being produced. Throughout this ordeal, Sarah maintained her composure with the discipline that had carried her through the most demanding military training in the world. She answered each hostile question with factual precision, never becoming defensive or emotional despite the obvious mockery from the assembled attorneys. As the afternoon wore on, several of the associate attorneys began checking their phones and watches, clearly finding the proceedings entertaining but lengthy. Blackwood's systematic destruction of Sarah's credibility had been thorough and, from their perspective, complete. Ms. Chen, Blackwood said as she prepared to conclude the deposition, I want to give you one final opportunity to tell the truth. Are you willing to admit that your claims about Navy SEAL service are fabrications designed to support your discrimination lawsuit? Sarah's response was quiet but unwavering. Ma'am, everything I've testified about regarding my military service is completely accurate. Blackwood's expression suggested she had expected no other answer. Very well. Let the record show that the witness maintains her incredible claims despite the complete absence of supporting evidence. She began organizing her files with the satisfaction of someone who had just dismantled an opposing witness so thoroughly that the case would likely be settled rather than risk a trial. The other attorneys in the room were already discussing dinner plans and weekend schedules, clearly viewing the deposition as a successful conclusion to what they considered a frivolous lawsuit. But Sarah had noticed something that the lawyers, focused on their legal maneuvering and psychological manipulation, had missed entirely. During the past 30 minutes, she had been receiving subtle hand signals through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows, signals that would be invisible to anyone not trained in military tactical communication. Her backup had arrived. Ms. Chen, Blackwood said as she prepared to officially conclude the deposition, I think we've established quite clearly that your claims about military service lack any credible foundation. Unless you have some magical evidence that suddenly materializes, I believe these proceedings are. Her words were cut off by a sound that none of the assembled lawyers had ever heard in their corporate environment. The sharp, synchronized footsteps of military personnel moving in formation. The sound was coming from the hallway outside the conference room, growing louder and more distinct with each passing second. The conversation around the table stopped abruptly as everyone turned toward the sound. The rhythmic precision of the footsteps was unmistakable. This wasn't the casual walking of office workers or building maintenance staff. This was the measured cadence of disciplined military movement, and it was approaching their location with obvious purpose. Victoria Blackwood's expression shifted from confident satisfaction to confused annoyance. What the hell is that noise? David, did you arrange for some kind of theatrical demonstration? David Martinez looked as puzzled as everyone else in the room. I have no idea what's happening, Victoria. This wasn't planned or anticipated. The footsteps stopped directly outside the conference room door. For several seconds, the room was filled with tense silence as 12 lawyers and one military officer waited to discover what was about to happen. The building's usual corporate sounds, air conditioning, distant elevator chimes, muffled telephone conversations, seemed suddenly inadequate to fill the space left by the absence of those purposeful footsteps. Then the door opened. 6 figures in complete military tactical gear entered the conference room with the fluid precision of a unit that had trained together for years under the most demanding conditions imaginable. They were dressed in black tactical uniforms with full combat equipment, their faces partially concealed by tactical sunglasses and communication headsets. Each moved with the controlled awareness of someone prepared for immediate action, their scanning of the room automatic and thorough. The lead figure stepped forward and removed his sunglasses, revealing the weathered face of someone whose experience went far beyond anything the assembled lawyers had ever encountered. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Sarah with obvious respect, "Commander Torres sends his compliments and requests permission to join this briefing." Sarah stood from her chair with fluid military precision, her transformation from witness under attack to commanding officer happening in seconds. "Permission granted, Master Chief. Brief the assembly on current operational parameters." The Master Chief turned to face the conference table full of lawyers, his bearing making it clear that the power dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Master Chief Rodriguez, United States Navy, Naval Special Warfare Command. I'm here to provide authentication for Lieutenant Commander Chen's service record and qualifications." Victoria Blackwood's mouth opened and closed without sound, her usual confidence completely shattered by the surreal transformation of the conference room from corporate legal proceeding to military briefing. The other attorneys sat frozen in their chairs, their phones and legal pads forgotten as they tried to process what was happening. "Master Chief," Sarah said with the tone of someone resuming command, "please brief these civilians on the classification parameters that have governed this deposition." Rodriguez nodded and addressed the stunned lawyers with professional courtesy that barely concealed his contempt for what he had observed through the room's windows. Lieutenant Commander Chen's service record includes completion of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, advanced special operations courses, and multiple classified deployments with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He presented a folder to David Martinez. "These documents, declassified as of 1,400 hours today, verify Lieutenant Commander Chen's qualifications, commendations, and current operational status." Blackwood finally found her voice, though it was significantly less confident than it had been moments earlier. This is highly irregular. You can't just storm into a private legal proceeding with military personnel." Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he found her objection amusing. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Chen is an active duty officer whose civilian employment was terminated in violation of federal laws protecting military personnel. This proceeding has been monitored to ensure that her rights as a service member are protected." One of the junior associates, apparently unable to contain his curiosity, spoke up nervously. "Are you saying she's really a Navy SEAL?" The second SEAL stepped forward, her movement revealing that the unit included female operators. When she removed her tactical sunglasses, her voice carried the same professional authority as her male colleagues. "Sir, Lieutenant Commander Chen is one of the most respected operators in naval special warfare. Her completion of SEAL training and her performance in classified operations have set standards that male and female operators aspire to achieve." The room fell into complete silence as the reality of the situation settled over the assembled lawyers. The woman they had been systematically mocking for hours was not only telling the truth about her military service, she was being vouched for by active duty SEALs whose presence in the room demonstrated the seriousness of their commitment to her credibility. Victoria Blackwood, her face pale and her usual commanding presence completely deflated, attempted to regain control of the situation. Even if Ms. Chen's military background is authentic, this doesn't change the fact that she was terminated for legitimate performance reasons. Master Chief Rodriguez opened another folder and placed documents on the conference table. "Ma'am, these reports detail the discrimination Lieutenant Commander Chen experienced at Titan Defense Solutions, including hostile comments about her gender, deliberate exclusion from decision-making processes, and retaliation for reporting safety violations that could have endangered military personnel." He turned to address Sarah directly. "Commander, Titan Defense Solutions training protocols have been suspended pending investigation. 3 other female veterans have come forward with similar discrimination complaints, and the Department of Defense is reviewing all contracts with the company. David Martinez, finally recovering from his shock, began reviewing the declassified documents that Rodriguez had provided. His expression shifted from confusion to amazement as he realized the scope of Sarah's actual military credentials. "Victoria," he said quietly, "these documents show that Sarah has received the Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and multiple other commendations for classified operations. She's not just a Navy SEAL. She's one of the most decorated special operations personnel in the entire military." Blackwood's face went completely white as she absorbed the magnitude of her error. The woman she had spent 3 hours portraying as a delusional fabricator was actually a genuine American war hero whose service record exceeded anything she could have imagined. The third SEAL, who had been standing silently near the door, stepped forward with additional documentation. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Chen's training protocols have been adopted throughout Naval Special Warfare Command. Her expertise in combat medicine and tactical operations has saved the lives of dozens of operators and contributed to the success of missions I cannot describe in this forum," Rodriguez added. The lieutenant commander's civilian employment was specifically arranged to provide technical expertise to military contractors. Her reports about safety violations were accurate, and her termination was clearly retaliation for her attempts to protect military personnel. Victoria Blackwood finally spoke, her voice barely audible. We had no way of knowing. The classification levels prevented any verification." Sarah's response was professional but pointed. "Ma'am, you had multiple opportunities to request verification through appropriate channels. Instead, you chose to assume that my claims were fabrications based on your preconceptions about women in special operations." Master Chief Rodriguez addressed the room as a whole. "Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Commander Chen represents the highest standards of military professionalism and integrity. The treatment she received during this deposition reflects poorly on civilian understanding of military service and the legal professions. Responsibility to treat all witnesses with respect." The atmosphere in the conference room had been completely transformed. The lawyers who had been confidently dismantling Sarah's credibility now sat in stunned silence, realizing they had just witnessed one of the most dramatic reversals in legal history. Their comfortable assumptions about military service, gender roles, and witness credibility had been shattered by the arrival of evidence they couldn't dispute or dismiss. As the SEALs prepared to leave, Rodriguez addressed Victoria Blackwood directly. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Chen's service to our country has been exemplary. I trust that future proceedings will reflect appropriate respect for her character and achievements." Blackwood could only nod mutely, her usual aggressive confidence replaced by obvious embarrassment and growing legal concern about her firm's exposure to sanctions for the treatment of a decorated military officer. The SEALs filed out of the conference room with the same precise formation they had used to enter, leaving behind a group of lawyers who were struggling to understand how completely their assumptions had been proven wrong. Sarah remained standing at attention until her colleagues had departed, then resumed her seat at the conference table with renewed authority. David Martinez was the first to break the silence. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me about the extent of your military background? These credentials completely change our legal strategy." Sarah's response reflected the operational security discipline that had governed her entire military career. "David, I told you exactly what I was authorized to disclose. The additional information only became available when my command determined that civilian legal proceedings were affecting military personnel and operations." Victoria Blackwood, clearly shaken by the complete collapse of her case, attempted to salvage something from the disaster. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, my firm owes you an apology. We were operating with incomplete information, and our questioning was inappropriate." "Ma'am," Sarah replied with military courtesy, "you were doing your job as you understood it. However, your assumptions about my credibility were based on prejudices about women in military service rather than objective evaluation of available evidence." The deposition resumed briefly to incorporate the newly declassified information, but the dynamic had changed completely. Blackwood's questions were respectful and focused, the associate attorneys took detailed notes with obvious respect, and Sarah's testimony was received with the attention due to a genuine expert rather than suspected fraud. Within a week, Titan Defense Solutions settled Sarah's lawsuit for an amount that included significant punitive damages and a commitment to implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all personnel. The settlement also included a formal apology and acknowledgement that Sarah's termination had been unjustified and discriminatory. The story of the deposition quickly spread throughout Seattle's legal community, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions about witness credibility and the importance of thorough investigation before attempting to destroy someone's character in legal proceedings. Victoria Blackwood's reputation suffered permanent damage from the incident, and her firm implemented new policies requiring extensive background verification before challenging witness credentials in high-stakes litigation. The case became required reading in legal ethics courses as an example of how prejudice and arrogance could lead to professional embarrassment and legal exposure. 6 months after the deposition, Sarah was promoted to full commander and assigned to develop training protocols for integrating civilian contractors with military special operations units. Her work contributed to improved safety standards and better cooperation between military and civilian personnel in overseas operations. She also became a sought-after expert witness in discrimination cases involving military personnel, her credibility enhanced by the dramatic vindication she had received during the Titan Defense Solutions litigation. Her testimony helped establish important precedents for protecting the rights of service members in civilian employment. 1 year after her confrontation with Victoria Blackwood, Sarah was invited to speak at the Washington State Bar Association's annual conference about military service, civilian employment, and the legal profession's responsibility to understand and respect veteran experiences. The most important lesson from my experience, she told the assembled attorneys, is that assumptions can be more dangerous than ignorance. When legal professionals assume they understand someone's background without proper investigation, they risk not only professional embarrassment but genuine injustice. Her presentation included both the legal aspects of her case and the broader implications for how civilian institutions interact with military personnel whose service may not be fully understood or appreciated. Military service, particularly in special operations, creates experiences and capabilities that civilian society may struggle to comprehend, she continued. As legal professionals, you have an obligation to investigate thoroughly rather than dismiss claims based on your preconceptions about what's possible or credible. The audience, which included several attorneys who had witnessed the infamous deposition, listened with the attention due to someone whose expertise had been dramatically and publicly validated. 2 years after her legal victory, Sarah married Master Chief Rodriguez, the SEAL who had led her unit's intervention in the conference room. Their wedding was attended by dozens of special operations personnel, creating a gathering that represented the hidden community of warriors whose service often went unrecognized by civilian society. During their wedding reception, Rodriguez spoke about the importance of supporting military families and ensuring that service members received appropriate respect in civilian environments. Sarah's experience taught all of us that the battles we fight overseas are sometimes easier than the battles our service members face when they return home, he said. We have an obligation to support each other not just in combat, but in every aspect of life. The couple established a foundation dedicated to supporting military personnel who face discrimination in civilian employment, using Sarah's legal victory as a model for protecting the rights of service members whose backgrounds might not be immediately understood or believed. 5 years after the deposition that had nearly destroyed her credibility, Sarah was selected for promotion to captain and assignment as Director of Special Operations Integration at the Pentagon. Her work involved developing policies for how military special operations units worked with civilian contractors, drawing on her experience with both communities. She occasionally returned to Seattle for speaking engagements, including a memorable appearance at Blackwood, Sterling and Associates' annual retreat, where she discussed the importance of thorough investigation and respectful treatment of all witnesses. Victoria Blackwood, who had remained with the firm despite the professional damage from their confrontation, introduced Sarah with obvious respect and acknowledgement of the lessons learned from their initial encounter. Captain Chen taught our firm important lessons about assumptions, investigation, and the extraordinary service provided by ordinary-looking people, Blackwood said. Her grace in the face of our skepticism was more professional than our treatment of her warranted. Sarah's response was characteristically generous. Ms. Blackwood, you were protecting your client's interests as you understood them. The experience taught all of us about the importance of complete information and mutual respect in legal proceedings. The conference room where Sarah had been mocked was later renamed the Chen conference room, in recognition of the lessons learned from the case. A plaque near the door reminded attorneys that truth may arrive in unexpected forms and demand recognition regardless of our assumptions. Have you ever been dismissed because your truth seemed too extraordinary to believe? Sometimes the most important validation comes not from proving others wrong, but from remaining true to yourself when everyone doubts your story. Sarah Chen proved that integrity and patience ultimately triumph over prejudice and assumption. From which corner of the world are you witnessing this incredible transformation from mockery to military validation? If stories where arrogance meets reality and truth arrives with overwhelming force inspire you, subscribe for more. Moments where hidden heroes reveal themselves when justice demands recognition.